You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1984 classic and our first film in the 2022 Stephen Kingapalooza, Children of the Corn. Malachai!
That was a pretty good Isaac impression.
Thank you.
And yeah, we're going to go with some down-home Stephen King at that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that everyone loves it, and we talked about it before. We talk about it every so many episodes, quite honestly. So we don't need to get into some of the more bombastic Stephen King. We're going to choose something a little more bombastic after, but for now, it's going to be quiet, sweet home near Hemingford Home, Nebraska, with Gaitlin and Children of the Corn. I saw this when I was way too young, and you had mentioned when we were talking before the show that you may have seen this when you were way too young. When was the first time you watched this 1984 version of Children of the Corn?
In 1984, for those of you who might be curious, I was still a baby, so I wouldn't have seen it quite then, but I think that it would be very safe to say by 89 or 90, I had definitely seen this, and I have the VHS here, and this one is the 1992 VHS release, which was the first time that this was released to home video. So this one I didn't get in 1992. I got it a little bit later, and it was actually a hand-me-down from somebody that I didn't know because I found it in a box when I was a kid. But so in and around there, we had a regular copy that I could watch. But I also felt like this film was on TV constantly in the late 80s and early 90s. Maybe I'm mistaken about that.
No, you're absolutely right. It was on TV a lot. And I think that most people who have watched it that aren't, horror fans or of an age where they would have been subject to the hype of this movie when it first came out, they probably have watched it on television. And it's a movie where you had mentioned that it could be mistaken for a made-for-TV movie because it was on TV so much. And some of its sequels as well. It would be part of those around Halloween time, horror marathons on many channels. It was a staple on Scream when that was a network, and Dusk subsequently. So most people probably watched it on television. It was in heavy rotation, and it's a good choice for it because it's not overly graphic. It doesn't have many things that they would have to edit out as far as language or sex or drug content, none of those things. So it's sort of like a darling for throwing on TV, wouldn't it be?
You're absolutely right. And I think that it has its shocking moments, but it's quiet enough in most parts, very dialogue heavy, that you could get away with showing this on TV, and it's 90 minutes. It's very breezy. People nowadays are accustomed to the Stephen King releases and now even Joe Hill releases that are epics. They're quite long, 2 hour, 2.5 hour movies. Whereas this is just a breezy 90 minutes. You're in and you're out. And if you put that on television, that's 2 hours of television blocked out, including commercials. And you wouldn't really have to cut too much. You might have to shave a little bit off of that car accident. But not too much else than that.
Which is fitting. And it has that Stephen King name. So it not only fits on TV time-wise, fits on TV content-wise, it is a draw because even now, and it's strange to me in a way to think back to the time when Stephen King's name was all you needed to sell a movie. And it still is. Mm-hmm. We're here how many years later, and throwing Stephen King '(S) before any film title is instant gold. And his books are to the like sort of instant gold too. Sure, he's a multi-time national bestseller over and over again. He's sold billions of copies of books. Every book he publishes has a readership, not only in constant readers, but there are different Stephen Kings for everyone. Some people like his dark horror slasher type stuff. Some people like his more lighthearted, almost mystery thriller type stuff. There's a Stephen King for everyone. Same with his films. Mm-hmm. There's a Stephen King for everybody. This particular film was one of the first horror movies I remember ever having been recommended to me. My cousin Jason, who was also too young to watch this movie probably, had watched it at his home. I guess his parents had rented it when it first was available for rental, like a year after its release. They might have seen it in theater. My parents probably saw it in theater because they were theater going at that time. And him telling me that the beginning of this film was the most brutal thing he's ever seen in his life, and we had to watch it. So we stole on down to his basement, not unlike your basement on Alta Vista Drive, and watched this film. And I sort of didn't remember much of the film except the beginning, because it was quite shocking to me, the beginning in the diner.
Yes.
And I think the only other scene that stuck with me was from Nightbreed, Clive Barker's Nightbreed, mm-hmm. another diner scene of people flipping out kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the scene in this stuck with me so much. And I was quite young. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. Mm-hmm. So probably around the same age you were when you watched it.
It seems to be a good rite of passage for young horror fans growing up in the mid to late 80s and the early 90s. Because, like I said, it's one of those films that are so readily available, but also it's got that level of violence in it that you would find quite shocking. This is nothing totally new in terms of killer kids movies. There's lots of fucking movies out there where the kids are the problem, and you combine this type of folk horror with the fact that it's also a killer kid movie. It really types in goes into the frustrations and anxieties that I didn't really realize that I had as a little kid, mostly centering around religion. I find that it is very religious people are very rage-inducing to me as an adult. I find it creepy. I find religious people creepy, and I don't care what your religion is. I just find it creepy. And I'm not saying that people who are religious are bad people, but I am saying that I look at religious people as somebody who have a fundamentally different understanding of the world that we live in than I do. I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but I am saying that for me, creepy. And so films like The Wicker Man and films like Children of the Corn, that even films like The Mist, and we talked about it when we handled The Mist, films that have zealots in it, I almost can't even watch sometimes because I need to be in the right headspace. And so I found myself, even last night, I watched Children of the Corn. I watched it on Shudder. I do have the VHS tape still here, but I had this thought where I was like, if I didn't have to watch it for the show, I wouldn't have wanted to watch it last night because I wasn't really in the headspace of watching zealots. And I don't know how you feel about that, though.
I feel much the same, although I don't know if it was not having Catholicism around me whatsoever when I was young. I didn't meet a Catholic, to my knowledge, until I was about 15 years old, maybe 13 to 15 years old. I attended my first Catholic service alongside friends when I was about that age, and I was told to go sit up where the women used to have to sit.
Yep.
And where visitors have to sit, or where immigrants would have to sit. I don't know if any Catholic churches are still like that, and I fucking hope to God they're not. to God. I hope to God. Look at me go. But yeah, it was a very horrible experience, and the incense was suffocating to me. The constant up and down, the having to go up and put something in your mouth is like, that was all very terrifying to me. But other than that, one very strange experience, which I guess is a very normal experience in a Catholic church. I'd been around United church goers, Lutherans, and the Bible was around in the house. But I didn't know any zealots. I'd never met a born again until I was maybe in my late 20s, probably. So like I'd never had someone that was an evangelical person of an evangelical mind or any sort of Bible thumping. I never had that around me. And my mom loved religious horror. She loved that. She loved the idea of these preachers on radio stations in Nebraska screaming about the Lord. And she would once in a while turn on those televangelists, and we'd laugh about it because it was like an alien thing. We didn't know anyone like that, so it was a joke that this existed in our world. So I have like there's a high entertainment value with this sort of thing to me, and there always has been. My mom's always been a big fan of religious horror, so when I would watch a lot of religious horror, she and I would watch it because she was such a fan. And I love that angle in this very, very much. Although there is something about the proselytize, I can't even say that word. There is something about the Bible thumping Isaac and Malachai in this film that has not aged very well for me. So I think that would be the most grating thing. But I love religious horror with fanatics.
You could be considered a fanatic of a different sort. In terms of your understanding of the Kingaverse, you have a breadth of knowledge that I just don't possess. Now, I spent a little bit of time today going over some theories and some conversations about this short story, and that was turned into a film, and that spawned all of these sequels. But I, even as a kid, really treated it as this independent thing. I never knew until I was an adult that you were meant to, or at least King liked to imply or sometimes directly state, that all of this was this interconnected world. So the world at the Stand and Cujo and Salem's Lot, all of these, Firestarter, to talk about a recent King remake, all of these things, all of these children, all of these people who have psychic abilities and demons and vampires and interdimensional travelers, all of these things exist within this wide tapestry of characters, and people have like plotted out all of this intricate interconnectedness throughout all of the Stephen King lore. What my question is, and I don't know if we've ever touched on it before, maybe we have, but how much of this is fan theory? Humans love patterns. We love to make connections. And how much of this is King saying, yes, this is what I intended?
It's irrefutable when you're reading a book and the same character appears in two separate stories.
Yes.
The stories themselves are not connected. The stories themselves are completely different. They might even happen in different towns. They might happen in different states. Usually never different countries. I don't think he's written outside of the US and a little in Canada. But it does mention, not only by name, a character, their age will match up, or circumstances like the prison they went to, or the time they got that super bad flu, or the time that girl found that thing in the forest. You know, they will mention these things. So yes, Stephen King does directly say things are connected. And there are times when you don't even have to ask him if things are connected. It can be as subtle as the make and model of a car that does not exist. So we have an idea of what multiverse of the King multiverse this is taking place in. Or it can be as distinct as geography. And it can be kind of muddy as geography. You would have to maybe ask Stephen King, is Gaitlin near Hemmingford home? Is Gaitlin where people would theorize there's certain dark forces going on beyond He Who Walks Behind the Rose? Is it beside where Mother Abigail lives in The Stand? Now, I have to reread this short story because I took a quick spin through it. I didn't see specifically, but in the movie, they mention that Gaitlin is beside Hemmingford. And the only Hemmingford, Nebraska that we've heard of in Stephen King lore is where Mother Abigail's from, in The Stand. And it features quite heavily in The Stand, Hemmingford home, to the point that people are having visions about it. And just saying the words Hemmingford home have a very distinct meaning to me as a Stephen King or any reader of Stephen King or watcher of Stephen King's different iterations of The Stand. So yes, he does definitely write within Castle Rock, the fictional Castle Rock, the true life Bangor, Maine. A lot of stories take place around there, and they mention things like the time that pig got loose and killed a bunch of people, or the time that dog got rabies and killed a bunch of people in different stories. Mm-hmm. So he does definitely do it, but then there are things that are fan theory that aren't 100% stated within the book, and if you asked him, you might get an answer that is like, oh yeah, totally, that is Randall Flagg. Or you might get an answer that is like, well, I don't know, what do you think? Like, he can be coy from what I've seen in interviews about some things, but for the most part, it is 100% Stephen King, yes, writing within a multiverse that he has created as far back as the 70s. Because this particular story does have some strands that tie it to other stories, and other stories that he was writing around the time of The Stand that are sort of all kind of interconnected loosely.
That's very fascinating to me. I love for him that he's had this ability as a writer that so few people get. And as a storyteller myself, not obviously that I'm at the level of a Stephen King, but as someone who likes to make stories, this idea that there's a lot of goodwill towards your creations because you started so strong, and it almost seems like this overnight international stardom, and you're given so much room to play and so many eyeballs on what you're doing that you can just keep going and making things complicated, and to have a readership who will make maps about your version of America where all of these things take place, and drawing threads to what's connected and what's not, and all of this fan theory. You could, if you were Stephen King, and I don't think that he does this, but if you were Stephen King, you could spend the rest of your life reading interpretations of your own work if you preferred. Now, thankfully, Stephen King has decided to not do that and just to keep writing and creating and adding to the tapestry. But that level of success, and we've talked about the level of Stephen King's success, that you had always told me that there are more prolific writers, in the sense of there are writers who have created more novels and more short stories than King, even though I find that hard to believe as a person who's quite ignorant to the literary world. But because to me, if you were to say, how many books do you think Stephen King has? I would say 1,000. You're right? I would just say 1,000 because I don't know, but it seems like 1,000. In the same way that you might say, how many Stephen King movies are there? And I would just say 1,000. We could do Stephen Kingapalooza forever. But to maybe not be as prolific a writer for him, but to be so fucking famous, like as famous as a writer could possibly be, where it's not like you're known for one, like another writer that I would say is extremely famous, Anne Rice. That's a very famous writer. But how many of her books could a dummy like me name that isn't just, Interview with a Vampire, and maybe a couple of others, but like so many people know so many of his fucking books and short stories because so many of them have been adapted to film. I'll never stop being impressed by that, is what I'm saying, I think.
He is very impressive, and was impressive even at the time with the amount of books that he already had out, the way he bust upon the scene all of a sudden, having had books already prepared for publication when he went big. So he seemed to all of a sudden bust onto the scene with a ton of books and never stopped. And I'm glad, like you said, he's just continued to write, and whether things connect or not, it doesn't really matter. It's always struck me as kind of sad that this map that people create of the Stephen King multiverse, as other Easter eggs are being discovered, because I just read moments ago that they mentioned Gaitlin, an empty town named Gaitlin in it. So you have to have read all of those things and really comb through them and reread them. And there are people who have reread all of Stephen King's recently to find more little tidbits to add to the multiverse. When he passes away and there's no more Stephen King to be written, that map will be done. And that is depressing. It's a depressing thought. Although it would bring some finality to proving all of the tiny connections and Easter eggs that are in all of his work, and no more will appear. And we can only go back and find ones that already exist, which is kind of interesting. He's so big that you can get shirts that say, based on the novel by Stephen King, and that's all it needs to say.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what it is. He is Sutter Kane in the real world. He is that huge and big and famous, and it's unmistakable when you put a Stephen King novel in a book, whether it's a Stephen King movie like this one that has the book that I'm holding in my hands right now, that is on the dash of the car, that contains the short story that this is written on, that this film is based on. Or you can throw a Stephen King novel in any movie and people will say it and be like, Stephen King, I know where your influences lie. And it tells you a lot about the movie, the writer, the actor, the character, whoever's around that book. Just like it does in real life. If somebody has a whole wall full of Stephen King, it tells you something about that person, does it not?
I think that one of the things that I always notice as a person, I like to go thrifting. I like to go to bookstores. I like to peruse shit where you're going to find people leaving behind Stephen King books. I used to have this little habit of, there was a leave a book area in the bottom of my building, and anytime I saw a Stephen King book there, I would grab it and I would take a picture of it, and I would ask my friend, who was a huge Stephen King fan that worked at my store, if he had do you got this one? And if he said no, I would take it and I would give it to him to help grow his collection. But it seemed that every time I was picking up a book, it was one that I hadn't even fucking heard of. I was like, I don't even know what this is. This guy's got so many fucking books that haven't even been made into movies. But fuck all that. I wanted to point out one more thing before we really get into this film itself, is my VHS copy of Children of the Corn. So like I said, I found this in a box in my neighborhood growing up with a bunch of other tapes. Most of those tapes have not survived the Great Flood of 2005 or 2006, whenever that was. But I'll tell you something interesting. Now, listeners, you can't see this, but I'm going to take the slip cover off. And you're gonna look at this, and Lydia, you're gonna see there's a nice pink label on it that looks like it might be for like a little child, and you got a little zebra here. There's a zebra, there's an elephant on it, and there's a lion. And the lion, they're all very happy. The lion's holding a soda. The elephant has got a little popcorn there, and it's got the name, or this video belongs to Debbie Parent. I don't know who Debbie Parent is, but that's what this tape says. And the funny thing about it is, when I grabbed this. I basically, when I found this box, I grabbed every horror movie that was there. I just picked it up. And when I took the cover off of this finally, and I saw this tag on it, I thought to myself, oh, fuck. And that's a good tip for any of you thrifters out there hunting for VHS. Do yourself a favor and take the slip cover off. If you're going for CDs, open up the jewel case. It's good practice because a lot of times you might just be buying a box and you're not actually buying the thing that you want. And there might be the wrong tape in here. And I thought that's what the case of this was. But that's not the case, because when you pop it in, it is Children of the Corn. And if I were to take this label and peel it, it's the proper Children of the Corn marking on the bottom. So somebody just lets you know, Debbie Parent, this is my copy of Children of the Corn. And I was very curious about like what circumstances would there be where there would be a VHS tape that you would need to put your name on.
In only maybe a public lending circumstance, like the laundry room in the building beside mine in part of the complex that I live in has a book and movie, take a book, leave a book kind of area, but you're expected to like bring the stuff back or just read it in the laundry room from what I understand. So that could be the case, that something like that, but it is so weirdly childish. That is probably one of the creepiest thing I've seen today.
It is very childish to the point in which I was like, is Debbie Parent like fucking 6? Like why would this person have such a little kid? It's a homemade label because Debbie Parent is not written on it. It's part of the typing. So that meant that somebody made this little cartoon drawing. And I thought it was so funny that this VHS, so funny that I've never taken the sticker off, where I'm sure lots of people will be like, Joe, just take that fucking sticker off of it. Maybe one day I will, but for now I'm like, no, it's part of the history.
You would think that it would be a marketing ploy. If it did have a line where you could just write your name on it, then it would be like, oh, this is supposed to be in one of the kids' abandoned bedrooms. But no, it definitely belonged to somebody who insisted on marking their things. Like I've seen from the library of, and I've seen some pretty strangely childish stickers that go in like a book plate that you stick inside of a book to say that it's part of your library. And it is weird, especially in horror books. It is doubly weird when there's like a happy giraffe and a line that says this book belongs to so and so. Yeah. It's always charmed me. I love little interesting things about books and VHS tapes and everything. It's like when people write their name on their Nintendo cards. I got a couple of Nintendo cards that like, this is Toby's copy of DuckTales, and I'll never take that off, Toby. Don't you worry, buddy. I'll save your legacy. Because at some point you felt the need to write your fucking name on your NES card as if it's going anywhere. And it's such an alien practice to me. I wouldn't even understand why you would need to do it. Maybe people out there who are listening absolutely understand. Maybe they had like siblings that took everything, or they had like, you know, they were part of a daycare like you said. Who knows? But fuck all that, Liz. Fuck it all to hell. What is this movie even about anyways? This movie is about how the person who screams the loudest isn't always right. And while they may have some very good ideas, and maybe authority is the foot we're crushed under from time to time, they're not always right, and you don't need to blindly follow them. We have the convoy people who have just bought St. Bridget's Church downtown, and it's basically a Children of the Corn scenario going on downtown Ottawa with these friggin' people. And they are the ones that yell the loudest. They are the ones that are demanding retribution, cleansing. They want someone hung from a cross in a cornfield, basically. And it's happening with balanced adults. So what do you expect from children? What do you expect?
The premise of this film, ladies and gentlemen and non-binaries, is the fact that a very mysterious young boy who somehow looks like an old man named Isaac comes to the sleepy town of Gaitlin. and manages to coerce the children of the town to murder their parents. And some of it is murder the way you'd suspect children might try to overwhelm adults, with poison in their coffee. I'm drinking a coffee right now, but I made it myself, so I know it's okay. But the rest of it is just a lot of dogpiling and stabbing. And the adults are caught completely flat-footed. And then you have this extremely effective sequence that they intro with the credits of the film that is done with a child's drawings and illustrates, like the fucking end credits of WALL-E, what happened in this town. And it shows more death, more sacrifice, religious gatherings, and the growing of corn, people toiling in fields, all while a drawing of Isaac oversees them all. And you can tell because he's got his wide brim hat and his little black suit, and quite creepy.
Very, very creepy. And I think that this is my favorite intro as far as an illustrative intro, and it sort of bridges the introductions of films in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s into like a more modern era, especially with the points that it's trying to drive home about the corruption of youth and the power of zealotry. And so it's a really modern ideas that are being transmitted in a very like rudimentary way of filmmaking, but highly effective, and that all the children are smiling in all of these little hand-drawn pictures that are drawn by one of our favorite kids in this film, actually, little Sarah. She actually is a bit of a clairvoyant, which is a Stephen King trope to end all tropes, to have a little clairvoyant or an older clairvoyant or some sort of person with second sight. And this is that girl. And her images in this are almost frameable. I could see a big Stephen King fan taking these kids' drawings from the film Children of the Corn and putting them up as artwork, because it's quite a tapestry, quite a story. And Isaac is, as you said, we've got to see him in his wide brim hat and his beady little eyes. He, the actor is John Franklin, if I believe. He had a congenital disorder where he did age quite rapidly. It's not as apparent now to see him. He looks his age, really, quite honestly. But when he was younger, he had graduated university when he was acting in this film.
Really?
Fun fact.
Now I feel kind of bad saying that he looks creepy, but I didn't know.
He does, though, and that is part of it. I had a friend whose father had a similar disorder, if not the same, and he looked about 80 years old when he was in maybe 25, 30 years old. And I found it creepy as a kid, you know, like and it can be taken that way. At the time, I'm sure there are many, many people who have said far more disparaging things about the character of Isaac, quite honestly, because he does look like an old man in a kid's body.
The best part about Isaac is how he plays off of his enforcer, a harsher, more bloody interpretation of this strange religion where they worship this god, he who walks behind the rose. Very evocative title. I've always loved that since I was a kid. He who walks behind Rose. Like, that is just great writing. But the enforcer is Malachai. And Malachai is this brutal, bloodthirsty character, also a kid. And the way that these two characters and actors play off each other is, in my opinion, the whole show. This is the most memorable part of this entire narrative, are these two characters. And I find myself constantly feeling like they're not in it enough, even though they're in it plenty. but I'm just absolutely enamored and in love with both of these characters, and I always have been, which is why I feel like now looking at Children of the Corn as a complete picture, there's some fairly weak points within it as a film itself, not necessarily as a concept. But these two guys just do such a great job.
Really, honestly, and as young actors, like, because under the age of 20, I guess they all were. Many of the kid actors did a fantastic job, especially little Sarah and her brother,
Job.
I guess. Was that his
Job.
name? Job. Yeah. Little Job. Job, a fantastic little actor. But yeah, these teens, basically, the older of the kids, Isaac and Malachai were the riveting ones entirely. On every watching. On the first watching of this, absolutely terrifying. The next time I went to watch this was years later, and I had almost like a shade of embarrassment in that I was afraid of these kids when I was a kid. Very afraid of these kids. And as a teenager myself at the time, second time watching this, it was just like, wow, as if I found these kids scary and not cartoonish. And upon every subsequent watch, they become more and more cartoonish to me. But I don't know what it was when I was young or first watching, or if it was that everyone watching it for the first time in the 80s found them absolutely terrifying, and there was nothing funny about the way that they were acting or the way that they acted those particular characters. But there is this amount of embarrassment for myself that I get watching this film. Am I alone in finding them a little bit cartoonish, for lack of a better word?
I don't think so. I agree with you entirely. But if I could take you back, Liz, all the way back to when we were kids, I think a lot of that fear response comes from the fact that we were not interpreting them as our peer group. We were interpreting them as the chaos that is teenagers. When you're a little kid, and I have so many memories about like being in Carlton Place with my grandparents and seeing a group of kids skateboarding and being afraid that they were going to make fun of me because I was like a little kid, but wanting to, like, I want to come skateboard too. Like, I want to, like, because they are like adults, but they're not safe like adults can be. I know some adults are not safe, but some adults, most adults are usually pretty safe. Teenagers are adults that are still imbued with this chaos, the chaos of children in almost adult bodies. And when I was a little kid, I don't know about you, when I saw high schoolers, they looked just like adults to me.
Yeah.
Now, when I see a high schooler, they look like babies to me because I'm 38. And that is just the way it is. And, you know, part of it watching the film as an adult, and you see Bert fighting with Malachai, and I was just like, dude, what is he, like 16? Wring his fucking neck. Like, you don't have to. Why is this a problem? Like, Cassandra was joking around with me and saying that because I asked her, would you leave if I told you to leave in that scenario? Because Bert tells what's her face, Linda Hamilton, to get out of there, and she literally just leaves. Well, he's surrounded by kids with knives and pitchforks and torches and shit. And I asked them, Cass, would you leave if I told you to leave? And they said, yeah. There's no part of me that doesn't think that a giant man such as yourself couldn't destroy a group of 20 children. They were like, you grab one of them and use them as a flail. I was like, you're probably right. But when you're a little kid, you're like the little kids of Gaitlin. You're like Job and Sarah and young Joseph, who know that what they're doing is wrong. Their parents have been murdered, but you're at the mercy of the big kids. And that's where the fear comes from. because we know as kids that when you're around big kids with no supervision, you are at their mercy.
And the yelling, too. The yelling and screaming, because that chaos of the teenager that you touch on, and that is absolutely it. The unpredictability, the fact that they can wrangle the world as an adult, but have the unpredictability and the poor impulse control too, of a younger person is terrifying, and that their motives are murky, especially as a child. Their motives aren't so murky as an adult because you understand what hormonal insanity is going on in there, but you try to not want to understand it because it is, you want it to be murky again in a way, but as a kid their motives were always murky. And the yelling, people quote this movie often in two words: Outlander and Malachai. Yelled by the opposite characters. People constantly quote this movie. The most famous quote probably is Outlander, because yelling Malachai at somebody doesn't always have the same sort of weight as Outlander. And the Outlander scene was very, like, as a pivotal scene in the film where he's yelling Outlander. We have your woman, Outlander, if you want to say the full line. But most people get by just yelling Outlander. Is it that famous of a movie that you can just yell Outlander and everyone will know?
Not anymore. Not anymore. And I say this as a person who regularly shouts Malachai. And I've been doing that since I was a little kid. I was enamored with the sound of people's voices when I was a kid. I fancy myself a bit of an impersonator. I love to mimic people's voices and do impressions, and particularly matching people's cadence. I love to do that, and I find accents very interesting, and the harshness of Isaac's voice, that raspy like 3 octaves higher than anybody else, coming as someone who's shouting Bible Belt nonsense, but they're also a little kid. That to me was why the screeching sound of Malachai really hit my ears just right. Outlander is a term that I even forget. I don't really associate it with this film, but every time I watch it, I'm like, oh yeah, they do scream Outlander quite a bit. And it's funny because it reflects the strange way that all of the children talk. This sort of weird, what would you call it? Like pastoral, old-fashioned way of speaking. I don't know how you say it.
Yeah, it's like the only book they've ever read is the Bible.
Yes.
And it's a particular version of the Bible where things haven't been as cleaned up as a King James version. So it's obviously an older version of the Bible, if not like a Lutheran version, maybe, I don't know, where you are sticking to a lot of the these and thous, and just the sentence structure itself lends itself to 200 years previous. Very old time religion. Very First Testament.
For example, instead of saying, don't question me, Isaac will say, question me not. It's that way of speaking that hits your ear wrong, and in a weird way causes you to pay closer attention, because your brain is trying to autofill, for lack of a better term, what the sentences are going to be, but they're not speaking the way that you understand in a casual conversation. And being present in Isaac's sit-ins are so they're just such fucking mesmerizing scenes. Like I honestly I wish the whole movie was just the children and these characters, because you could do an entire story about 2 warring interpretations of religion. That is the real crux of the fascination of this story to me. It's not our protagonists who every time they're on scene, it just fucking stinks like death to me. Whether it's like Linda Hamilton singing an awful, like the worst song I've ever heard in my entire life, next to like Banana Phone, and then getting mad in the car ride because her husband or fiance or whatever won't fuck her. And I'm like, I sang this terrible song for your birthday and wore like a pink nightgown that and you don't want to fuck me, and now I'm mad because we have to go somewhere. And then you have to and then Bert, who's possibly one of the most unlikable characters I've ever seen in my entire life. He is so dickish. He is a narcissist. He's combative. He doesn't explain himself and is incompetent on top of that, in which you have, rightfully so, little children like calling him on his shit.
Now, little kids do that though. Little kids do call us on their shit. I remember hanging out with my friend Kelly's kids when they were very young. They're adults now. Beautiful, wonderful adults at that. But when they're kids, one of them pointed out I had a crooked tooth. Oh. And me being me and an adult in the room said, yeah, it's my only flaw. And she looked at me like, that is not your only flaw. And it was so point blank, so very much kids say the darndest things. It was fucking brilliant. And all the adults bust out laughing because it was great. It was really great and very honest, much like kids. And that's what these kids can do. Also, to Bert's defense, I suppose, or yours, if Cassandra was going to abandon you while surrounded by a ring of 20 kids bearing knives and pitchforks, is that those little buggers can get at you. It's like cats. If a bunch of rabid cats attacked you, or rats, or even hornets, it's a hornet's nest. Mm-hmm. You kick a hornet's nest, you're running. You're not going to be like, oh, they're just a bunch of little, I'll just squish them all. No, it does not work like that, because those little buggers, especially in groups, unpredictable. They're out of your line of sight too. You have to strain your neck to look down at them. It's very scary. To me, they're very scary. So I can get how Bert doesn't know how to, he knows how to manipulate adults. Quite obviously, he manipulates the hell out of his fiance all the time, and probably manipulated his way through college to graduate as a medical doctor. And at the hospital he works, he probably manipulates the hell out of everyone around him to get forward in life, because he is a narcissist, as you stated, probably clinically diagnosable as one. But these little kids don't work in that way at all.
Mm-hmm. Bert, first of all, I'm surprised he's not a writer. That's not a dig against Stephen King making lots of his characters a writer. It's more just, if he was a writer, I would get it more about just being like a guy with his head up his own ass and doesn't really know how to do anything. One of the most insane parts of this film happens. That diner scene that just kicks you in the nuts and has all of this death happen at once. And then you have like adults crawling for their lives while kids dogpile them and just stab them rapidly and, shoving a hand into a meat slicer. It's so wild. That's nothing compared to this boy that is going to get hit by a car, but not before his throat is sliced. This car crash is so fucking brutal. And I don't say that as a person who is easily shocked by things, but they linger on not only the body getting struck, but also the body as it's getting run over and then flops behind the car after it's hit. I mean, there's no way he would have survived even if his throat wasn't completely slashed. This is one of those situations where we find ourselves with a kid trying to escape through the corn, and young Sarah and Job, our first introductions to them, saying, we're going to help you. Now there's some great kid logic here where they're like, don't worry, we'll tell you when the coast is clear. And then Job, at the top of his lungs, is like, there's no one around, go! Like, holy fuck, the loudest kid in the universe. But it's of no use. Malachai catches up with him cuts his throat. He is hit by a car. Bert then, he's a physician, Lids. I don't know if you knew this. Bert then decides to inspect the body, look around, find the suitcase, take the suitcase, leave the body covered on the road, because this is supposed to be in 1964. There are no cell phones. There are no places to get into contact with people. Meanwhile, Linda Hamilton's character is sitting in the car, bored out of her mind. She did kind of hit her head, but she definitely looks like more annoyed by the whole situation. Like Bert, they got into a huge fight, and then Bert pulled over and said, I got to go take a leak, and he's taking too long, and the car's hot. That's the vibe that she brings off in this fucking scene. And then off they go. And then when she says, why did you take the briefcase? Oh, there could be a clue in it. I'm like, what? After you hit it by the car. And by the way, you have absolved yourself entirely of the fact that you could have killed this person because his throat was slashed. Even though you didn't see that happen, for all we know, that laceration happened when you, I don't know, hit him with your car at 100 miles an hour. But they're just like, well, we didn't kill him, obviously. He even said he was dead when he was stumbling out onto the road before we even hit him. He was already dead. It's insane. That's not how being dead works, you dumbass. And then also, he's like, I have the briefcase. Don't worry. We're going to call somebody, and I have the briefcase, which probably has some clues in it. By the way, why don't you rifle through it and look for clues? Like we're detectives. What the fuck is going on with these characters?
It fits better in my mind. You know, he was dead. A dead man walking is the line they could have used to soothe you there, because, yeah, the kid was bleeding out something fierce when he walked out of the corn to get hit by the car. Yeah, he was basically as good as dead. Mm-hmm. From the depth of the wound. I'm no physician. Bert is. I'll take his word on that and not much else. But yeah, so the kid was basically as good as dead. There was nothing they could have done for the kid, hitting him with the car or not. He probably would have fallen down had they passed by him with a slight breeze. So they put him in the trunk, and they're going to bring him to a hospital for identification, or for what? Because you don't just like leave a dead body, right? I guess. Right. I probably would have left it. I probably wouldn't have put it in the trunk. I probably wouldn't have taken the suitcase. I would have left all of it in situ because the police need to do their job. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to the police. I'm not going to a hospital. I'm not going to find his parents, and I'm going to play Scooby-Doo. I probably wouldn't open the suitcase if I was dumb enough to take it. It's just, it does smack me as dumb, but they're trying to be good Samaritans. And I guess with no cell phones at the time, that's what you would do, mm-hmm. because you're not sure of the location of things, or if someone else might move it, if they're convinced that the killer is still in the field, which, mind you, Vicky's character, Linda Hamilton's character, falls asleep in the car while waiting for Bert to come out of the corn with information on whoever had done this is probably watching us. And she falls asleep for like a second, I guess, and has a dream that Malachai comes up to the car with a knife, mm-hmm. which that doesn't fit for me at all. Everything that they've done, okay, they hit the kid, they put the kid in the trunk, they grab the suitcase, they go driving looking for a place called Hemmingford, because they had been told by a gas attendant that not only does he have no gas and he's no help, they should just keep driving. Don't go to Gaitlin. They're a small town. They're set in their ways. They don't have phones. They will not help you. They don't take kindly to outsiders. He's like unloaded on them all this information about don't go to Gaitlin. Don't go to Gaitlin. Don't go to Gaitlin. So they're driving around with this dead body looking for not Gaitlin, anywhere but Gaitlin, to find police or a hospital or something to take this kid to. And they're going through the suitcase, like you say, like detectives. And what do they find? Some clothes, things that young Joseph took to get away from Isaac and Malachai and the rest of the kids in the town, because there are other kids that don't believe in what Isaac has to say. Job and Sarah included. But he also brought with him a little effigy.
It's weird that he brought that. Maybe it's one of those things where, listen, I don't believe in any of this crap, but just in case, I'll bring my little corn Jesus with me, because it's just like it's like a little corn man on a cruciform, And it's funny that he brought that to me. You mentioned the gas attendant. So this gas attendant is a gas attendant in a long line of old men who know something in not just Stephen King narratives, but certainly in Stephen King narratives. He's got a dog. No need to go to the doesthedogdie.com. It does. His job seems to be he gives the kids gasoline when they need it, and also tells people to go around the town. And this is apparently the third car that he's done in 3 months. Bert does not like this guy's insistence to not go to Gaitlin. So much so that when he gets back in his car, he was just like, I don't know if he's senile or a sunstroke. And you're like, whoa, that is a level of aggression that is, again, fucking insane. And then when this old man is getting murdered and is dead and fucking bleeding because of the signage of Gaitlin, I don't know, and you can tell me in a second, is this supernatural or is this the kids are doing it? It doesn't make any sense to me. But when they go into a big loop and they go back to the gas station, what Bert says is like, he better not ever come to my emergency room. As if to say, this old man gave you, in your mind, bad directions, and so if he was dying, you wouldn't help him.
That line struck me as obtuse. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it also helps us hate Bert even more. And if Bert dies, which he should, which he could in the book too, right? You know what I mean? Like, there should be iterations of this film where different people make it and different people don't. But yeah, Bert is a horrible, horrible person. And Vicky isn't too much better for putting up with all of this. And she would rather just have a nap or listen to music or stay alone or play with kids. Like, that's what she seems to want to do and is good at through this film. It's like really unfortunate. She's a horrible character and she just doesn't really do anything throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, except get paraded around the streets and tied up. She's basically the Penny in this Inspector Gadget story. So Bert, yes, it's a horrible line. When they're driving, though, in between the two times they visit the gas station, I do think it's supernatural. It is 100% he who walks behind the rose doing this. It's the same way that Joseph was running through the cornfield. You run straight through a cornfield. Corn, in this corn as well, most corn is planted in straight lines when people plant it. And you just run straight and you hit a road. You will hit a road, some sort of road. And he gets turned around in this cornfield, knowing that he's like 10 feet from the road, but he gets turned around. It's much like in The Tall Grass, another Stephen King story that we've covered, and a really wonderful story that shows this sort of displacement, this supernatural displacement of a person within a space, or space moving around the person, one of the two. And this is a case of space moving around the people. And there's been other stories where people are driving through like the Irish countryside and the road turns around on them. And I love that sort of idea as well. And I think that that's exactly what's going on here. And I almost think that it takes them back into time. Like maybe this is why an entire town worth of people can disappear and no one notices, because they can't quite get to the town anymore. That could be part of it. You go to drive directly to Gaitlin and the signs start pointing you different directions. The road starts to turn into a dirt path through a cornfield. It's not a road anymore at all. Maybe when people aren't intending or aren't wanted in Gaitlin, the highway just passes it by and you can drive past all the signs that point to Gaitlin, thinking you're going to Gaitlin, and it just takes you to Hemmingford.
You might be right about that, and that puts to bed the itching part of the back of my brain that likes to ruin things for me, because I'm constantly in battle with, it's a movie, let it be a movie, let the story tell itself and enjoy it if you can. And then there's another part of me that says, So hang on a second. No one in Gaitlin had any family outside of this small town that might wonder where people went. You murdered hundreds of people and left the children. And then the other part of my brain says, well, now hang on a second here. So an entire town stopped paying taxes for 3 years, stopped probably using electricity in a significant way. Things, power stations, taxes, these are all things that are monitored by, the local authorities and governments and shit like that. And no one questions this. No one goes to the town. No one's seeing that it's becoming dilapidated, even though all the lawns are mowed. Like, I just find it so hard to believe. But if it exists in some kind of in-between time where, people can't get to it or don't know, there's like some sort of supernatural thing hiding people from it, that could work.
It could, and that's the only way I think that you could get around that, unless the other way is this particular little town is shown to be a lot bigger, and I wish they would have showed it the way that it's written in the book, which doesn't really lend itself to the idea that the state would have their eye on this town and wondering where their taxes are or wondering where their annual reports are as far as reporting as a municipality and all of these other, municipal or provincial, territorial, state or federal government concerns lie as far as a town goes. An unorganized township, however, of under something like 200 people could fall off the map, even in this day and age, to a certain degree, except for people that move away and have families. Now, these towns that they chose looked a little bigger than what is described in the original story. Where they had filmed even could have lent itself to it a little better, in that the 3 towns or so that they used to film this in had populations of under 200 or around 200 at the time, and are still around that today. But they have banks and chain eateries and franchise clothing goods stores and sporting goods stores. So like, there are other things to report to. There are head offices for some of these things, banks in particular. So like, it doesn't gel. It does not gel. As it's described in the story, it's a lot like the book Harvest Home, where people don't really come in and out of that town. And if Isaac had had a hold on this particular town to any degree for years, or He Who Walks Behind the Rose having a hold on this town, the chance that no one ever moved away is very high. So there's no one to have been coming to call in the 3 years that this town ceased to exist.
This town not only is isolated from the world in that people don't seem to be able to go through it unless to fulfill something a little bit more prophetic, but there is also no information going out. Televisions, telephones, books, music players, all of these things are forbidden from the children who could possibly view the outside world, or really any form of entertainment that is not this bizarre religion. And after you're done toiling in the cornfields, I guess you're just sitting around listening to speeches, sermonizing by Isaac, and I suppose on the hunt for outlanders, if any show up. The religion itself is hard to really put a finger on. It seems like it might have some pagan aspects to it. It also has a Logan's Run aspect to it, that when you hit 19, you're not going to see 20.
Which is one place where the story and the remake, from what I understand, differ, is that there are teenagers and there are babies in Gaitlin. under the auspices of Isaac and he who walks behind the rose in other iterations of this story. But yeah, in this film, it's, and also like Midsummer, but a lot younger than in your 70s, when you give yourself over to the idea of death because you have fulfilled what is demanded to you by your new God.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of like what they do after hours, they listen to Isaac give sermons or hunt for outlanders or make corn dollies and corn Jesus. I love the folk art in this particular thing. There isn't enough of it. I mean, I like the folk art, if you call it that, in Blair Witch too. And there are many little Blair Witch stick sigils all over the place. There's quite a few corn dollies, corn crosses, corn art, pictures of Jesus that have been redone with corn glued to them, much like a macaroni art that a kid would do in grade school. I absolutely love that. It's creepy as hell, though. It's very creepy looking, these corn teeth Jesus and stuff. Did you find that this is completely blasphemous, or is it just sort of like a childish expression? Is it something that you think that they're ordered to do, and it's a real depiction, an effigy, if you will, or an idol? Or is it just something they do to pass the time at night?
I think it's part of that, because I think you can't, if you take humans and you take away our creature comforts of how we've come to entertain ourselves with TVs and movies and music and literature and everything like that, there's still going to be this inherent need to create and have culture. And around all of the things that we do, art and culture, a lot of it that we have now starts with someone's religion, a religion we remember or a religion that we don't. Music, classic art, classic literature all had these aspects of it. I think this is an inherent human need, and I think that as long as the things that you're toiling away with are related to he who walks behind the rose, I think that it's okay. And if you were to wait 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of this constant society, you would see more art and perhaps, well, this music's okay because it's a song praising he who walks behind the rose. Or this play that we've put on, this is a story about our devotion to it. I don't think humans can help it. So I don't know if this is Isaac saying, yes, and we will create little toys. I think they're kids, but they're human, and they need to do these things because we as humans need to do these things.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, so they're not going to take them to the next town over and sell them at the craft show, and it's not really part of their study and their devotion. It's a part of their entertainment. Mm-hmm. It's the only real entertainment they seem to have left. Decorating everything with, decorating or suffocating everything with corn stalks too. I found that visual has always persisted with me, and I found that quite creepy and quite effective as well. Now, the kids that do get away with murder, that don't actually murder anyone, little Sarah and Job, she seems to be given a lot of latitude because she's their clairvoyant. She's the one that saw the Outlanders coming in her drawing. She's the one who saw the blue man coming in her drawings. And she's allowed to sort of sneak into their old house, which none of the kids are allowed to go and sleep in or sneak in or play in their old houses. But Job and Sarah, because she's the psychic and he's her brother, they kind of get away with doing whatever they want. And they're the youngest, it seems, out of most of these kids. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy these two little actors, and I really enjoy their sort of being able to live outside the law, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But they also don't want to run the way that Joseph did.
I think that their age is, and also Sarah's clairvoyance would give them a perspective about, first and foremost, they are clearly terrified of Malachai, more so than they're scared of Isaac. Isaac is their authority figure, but Malachai is the one that would kill them in a heartbeat and has threatened to kill them in a heartbeat, and the only person that is keeping them from getting killed, because they know that they helped Joseph. They know, and Joseph was killed toot sweet. They didn't waste any fucking time for that. And the first real discourse between Malachai and Isaac that we see is the fact that Isaac spares Job and Sarah, because Isaac says that it is he who walks behind the roses will, and that she is a clairvoyant, and she has the power of sight, so they need her, not for what, who knows. So they really operate outside of the law, but it is the sword of Damocles in the form of Malachai. That thread could be cut at any moment, and I think where the movie progresses, it's obvious that if Malachai was left to their own devices, Sarah and Job would be dead in a few more hours.
Yeah, absolutely true. The little kids seem to know their way around the town too, where when the kids go on the run chasing Bert around the town to kill him, Malachai is a bloodthirsty little bugger. Little Job seems to know like all the little passageways, all the little alleys, all the sneaky little places, a little bunker basically that his father had shown him that isn't under their house, it's somewhere downtown, but like places where the older kids never go or don't know about. And that's really handy in that we get to see almost like the underground after hours version of Gaitlin. And I really do like those two kids for that. Aside from the kind of playful, quiet way that they take all of this. Sarah has clairvoyance, so I guess she feels pretty secure in that they're going to get out of this someday. And little Job is just like, meh, Isaac's a bully. He came here. And Malachai's crazy. We just ignore them kind of attitude. Very blasé, and I like it.
I just kept saying to myself, kids are just very resilient, and humans are good at adapting to their surroundings, because Job saw his father killed in front of him, and 3 years later he doesn't even really talk about it. There is a sense of understanding what the world is now, and it's not really related to what the world was then. And I don't know how the kids account for that, but I do know that while trying to inform Bert about what is going on, Bert has this attitude of white savior's the wrong way, but it's kind of like, I'm the scientist and I'm going to show you how hokey and silly your religion is. All religions. It seems to be a very subtle as a hand grenade, as the kids say. Well, I don't know if kids say that anymore, but subtle as a hand grenade approach to religion is stupid and silly, and if you just think for 5 minutes, and the level in which he's able to get through to these kids is actually really funny to me, because especially his big scene in the church, his he's holding the Bible and he's like, this is the way that he throws it into this pile of Bibles, and all the kids sort of gasp, clutch their pearls, look what he did to a Bible. I'm like, I'm sorry, you guys don't read the Bible. This is not, he walks behind rows is not in the Bible. What do you care when he just slammed a Bible down? And so it really kind of comes with this, I'm going to point out your silly rituals, I'm the civilized first world white man, and I'm going to show you how stupid your ancient cultures are. Again, just he's not wrong about this weird cult thing they got going on, but at the same time he does it in such a arrogant way, but also in a way the character never is talking in his mind to appear. He is always talking to children that have killed people, and he never seems to appreciate that, but children nonetheless.
No, absolutely. And anyone with a more balanced take would just run straight and try and find authorities, Children's Aid Society, something like that. But no, he is having this sort of white savior kind of moment. And as a doctor, explaining to them that by drinking one another's blood, they don't know what kind of diseases are spreading. It's kind of laughable on one hand, but he does have a bit of a point, and it is just grotesque what they're doing. This sort of like total blasphemous bastardization of the blood of Jesus, because Amos has hit 19 years old. He is going to be sacrificed to join he who walks behind the rows as part of the cornfield. And it's a noble endeavor, sure thing. There's not much else to do after 19 years old, I suppose. But he walks in on this ritual, which is great. And I really like the imagery of the church being taken over by corn Jesus and whatever, he who walks behind the rows, and all the corn that is going on. I've only ever seen this much corn at a harvest-themed wedding. So it's very similar to that, with a lot of like more refuse and kid level versions of tomfoolery, where they've toppled things and thrown things in piles and burnt things and been decorating with the corn. It's a very cool scene. If my dislike, much like your dislike of Bert, hadn't gone to a fever pitch at this point, it could have been the linchpin scene. More like the linchpin scene is really Malachai dragging Vicky through the streets, yelling for Bert to come out because they have her. And it's a wonderful scene, wonderfully acted too. What should have been its counterpart of Bert breaking up a sacrifice, a ritual sacrifice in a church, just sad trombone. That's where it ranks as far as excitement and pivotal moments in this plot.
He doesn't even really care that they're going to commit a sacrifice. He's more concerned with the fact that they're just drinking blood, and this is stupid. You're drinking blood, and this is stupid. Like, yeah. That's really his point that he's making. Also, the thing that you pointed out a little while ago about how Vicky is all too happy to not be by Bert's side. I'm going to City Hall. I'm going to go look around this strange, empty town. And Vicky's just like, yeah, okay, see you later. I'm just going to hang out with this little girl in this empty house where we don't know who owns it or what's going on or why there's a child here or why there's corn jammed and everything. See ya. Like, I was like, man, how much do you hate your fucking partner to want to get away from them that bad?
And it's super misplaced. It's super misplaced mother instinct, I suppose, too, because not every woman is like, I want to hang out with the little tiny girl in the abandoned house, make sure she's okay and play dollies and I don't know, whatever the hell her point was, because she doesn't seem to really be questioning the kid too clearly the way that any adult would be questioning this kid, especially when she's just like, shrug, I don't know, Isaac killed all our parents, whatever. You have a lot more questions instead of just like, well, you like listening to records or something. Like you would be asking a lot more questions than just wanting to literally chill out with this kid, because that's all she really wants to seem to do.
Bert's the one losing his shit. Like, they asked the little girl 3 questions. She's just like, we're talking in circles. I'm out of here. I'm going to the City Hall for some real answers. I was like, you're not talking in circles, dipshit. You're talking in a straight line. You now know what happened. You've gotten names of people that you should probably figure out. You know Isaac, you know Malachai, you got all this information. And just because she won't tell you, you won't directly take you to Malachai or directly take you to Isaac because she's scared of them, you're just like, we're talking in circles. I'm Bert. I'm out of here. Like, anyway, fuck that guy. When things happen in this film, they happen very quickly. There is a lot of setup to what happened to the families, and then Vicky and Bert arguing, the gas station attendant, all this kind of stuff builds up. But by the time they're in the town, Vicky will get attacked almost immediately, and it probably be super disorienting when she's like, I was just sort of like driving with my boyfriend to some, for his thing about being a doctor, and now I'm getting crucified in front of the Blue Man. I wanted to ask you about the Blue Man, if you don't mind. And My question is, do you really think that they could, even though they're children, maybe the super young ones, it has been 3 years, but do you think it would suffice to say for Isaac to be like, the blue man, we've vanquished him, and then every other person in the town who's a kid and not an imbecile would be like, that's a police officer. You don't have to call him the blue man. Like, we have a name for what he is. He's wearing a police officer's uniform and little baby books. Here's a fireman. Here's a policeman. Here's a mailman. Like, it's some of the first things that children learn to recognize. So, like, why do you think he can get away with calling him the blue man?
I never really thought about it. Past, the influence of He Who Walks Behind the Rose must have been very deep, to be sure, for years in this town, to the degree that maybe they didn't go to traditional school. Maybe their school teachers were younger and younger each year, to the point that it was substitute teachers that were 14 years old teaching the younger classes. Could be. But it is startling. It works very well, and I like the scene with the police officer, and they talk about the blue man, and you don't really get any story, but you just assume that one day a cop came there to figure out what the hell was going on, and the kids killed him, strung him up, and now he's a sacrifice to He Who Walks Behind the Rose, and a really good deterrent, I guess. If any other cops show up, they're like, whoa, they sacrificed cops here, let's get out of here. I don't know, whatever it's supposed to actually do. But that they all refer to him as the blue man, so that you can just call it us and them, right? It's kind of weird.
It's very folksy. It is that folk horror, like the blue man from another town. I always got the sense that he was like last man standing. Like there's such a 0 day thing you could do with this story that I would, if they ever wanted to do, like, here's the prequel to Children of the Corn, which is all 0 day of the town of Gaitlin getting eradicated down to the last adult, because you would have to, okay, so there's that initial blitz, but there had to have been adults that fought back, that tried to escape, that tried to do stuff, and we find out that the blue man did try to do something that figured out at the very least that the problem might be the corn itself. But I had one question before we get into like the finale of this film. In your reading of the story and seeing the other Children of the Corn films and all the stuff that you know about Stephen King, have they ever said where Isaac came from? They always just refer to him as he came from out of town. But do they ever say where he comes from?
I don't believe so. I need to reread the short story for sure. I've read snippets of it, and I've read it when I originally read it a long time ago. I don't think they say. It's just when Isaac came. That is like the extent of the origin of Isaac.
Just some kid from out of town. I can tell you who just starts treating him like some kid from out of town is Malachai, because during his preachings and given the different ideology that these two young boys have, we finally have this breaking point in which people may listen to Isaac, but they're afraid of Malachai. And Malachai is tired of listening to speeches. He's tired of sermons. He's tired of prophecies. He's tired of rituals. He wants blood. He wants the harsh interpretation of this religion. And he is no longer interested in Vicky being crucified because of some vision that some seer did. He's like, fuck this, string up Isaac. And Isaac orders the death of Malachai, but it is too late. And this is where you have Isaac strung up in front of the blue man himself.
And screaming his little Isaac head off. And I like this scene. I like the casting so very much here. This is where it deviates 100% from the story. Up until now, the story and the book have been pretty similar. There's differences in the relationship between the husband and wife or fiance, boyfriend, girlfriend that we meet here in the film, as they are husband and wife in the book. And I think the remake is a little closer in that regard. But a lot of stuff is, they hit someone on the road. They encounter a gas attendant. They enter Gaitlin. It's abandoned. All the parents have been killed. Children, church, corn Jesus, whatever. All that stuff's been very similar. He Who Walks Behind the Rose, all very, very similar. The names of characters and their roles, Isaac and Malachai's roles within the cult, because let's call it what it is. It's a cult. And then it deviates 100% with this whole like sacrificing Isaac thing. Terrifying. Poor guy. That is, this scene should be the most traumatizing as a kid to watch. The first scene is what stuck with me. For some reason, I was just like, yeah, I guess this is what happens. This is what they do. They string one another up all the time, sacrifice one another to He Who Walks Behind the Rose. I mean, it would have happened to Amos. Now it's happening to Isaac. Whatever. It didn't seem to really strike me the way that it strikes me as an adult. Really love this scene. Really love the freaking out of Isaac.
The various speeches that Isaac has throughout the film are done with such conviction and passion that when he gets to this, you even find the second his authority is questioned, he's taken aback. He's fearful, but then he falls back onto starts screeching like the zealot that he is. He's always been able to use his voice to get his way, to turn people's minds, and so he tries to put the fear of their demonic god into Malachai's heart, and it's to no avail, because everyone else has kind of decided that whether or not they liked Isaac or not, they're just so scared of Malachai and probably believed in his harsher interpretation, which is why, like, what eventually happens is when you have Bert bursting onto the scene. Thank you. It's wild to me that he's able to get through to them in any way, shape, or form, in which he's like, and here's all my logic to tell you about how you're like, when does that ever work? You want to tell someone who fucking believes in a magical corn god that their religion is stupid? It's going to be like in the Wicker Man remake, when or even just the first Wicker Man, fuck the remake, because fuck Nick Cage, but it's like when you try to have somebody, this isn't going to save your crops, this isn't going to do anything, what are you doing? You can't sacrifice me. And they don't listen, and they burn you alive because, oh, we've just been indoctrinated into this religion for 3 years that was so potent that we fucking killed our family. No one ever, and then Bert shows up and is like, hey guys, don't do that, that's silly. And they all look at each other like, wait, is it silly that we're doing this? What? No one ever told us that this was silly. Like, it's so unbelievable to me. Maybe it also has something to do with the fact that Bert did beat up Malachai. Like, he beat him in a fight. It's not that impressive because, like I said, Malachai is just a teenager. But maybe that's
not in the minds of those little kids, though.
No, that's true.
Now, I think that part of it is that he has beat Malachai, and looking at it in like a tribal pack dog mentality, that he is now the person that they need to follow because he's beat out the top dog, so to speak. He also, I guess, would be about the same age, size, probably saying the same things that the Blue Man would have said when he was there, because the instructions for how to defeat this, meaning He Who Walks Behind the Rose and the cult, and save yourself at the very least, were written down by the police officer. The police officer was kind of the last man standing, but I really think he must have visited at a later date when this cult and corn Jesus stuff was in full swing, and the gasohol production was in full swing, because they'd been making ethanol. I guess this town made ethanol beforehand, because I can't see the kids having figured out how to make ethanol out of corn
Yeah.
all by themselves. So
Especially
they must just be running this.
Job knows how to use the machines. Like, he knows more than Bert how to operate all of this stuff. So it's sorry. I just thought of Bert making a Molotov cocktail, and like, I need a thick rag, and then Vicky ripping Job's stupid little kid vest in half, and then Job has the line, "That's not a rag." And like, at no point Vicky's like, "I'm just gonna rip my big long stupid blouse that I'm wearing." No, like, "Come here, kid. I'm gonna rip your vest." This fucking. I'm sorry, that's not funny. It is funny, but I don't mean to like just completely derail everything. Let me ask you this, Liz. We skipped over it a little bit. There is an impending doom, if you will. This prophecy, such that it is that Vicky and Bert were supposed to come to this fucking town. And it was supposed to spark some kind of ritual that Isaac had said we were going to essentially crucify Vicky and offer her to he who walks behind the rose. Isaac himself is crucified instead. And then this light show, you know, listeners, if you want to know what it looks like, it kind of reminds me of in the original Star Trek series from the 60s, like when like there was a super intelligent blob in space that talked to Kirk and all them like, "I am the supreme intelligence." Like, it kind of reminds me of that. And it sort of envelops Isaac. It's very poorly done. Like, even for the time, it's startling how bad the graphics are. But what do you think? Do you agree, or do you think it totally fine, doesn't take you out of it?
Oh, it absolutely takes me out of it. I do agree 100% that it's horrible. It's childish. It's almost like they got one of the kids to do this with a piece of acetate over the camera lens. It's pretty bad. Like there's graphic, there's CG, rudimentary as it existed at the time, CG in the movie The Entity that almost takes me out of it, but they do as good of a job as they could have. This is an example of them not doing as good of a job as they could have. I don't know who or why they decided to do this. There could have been other in-camera effects. They could have tried to do this. They try some sort of animation effect that does not work, and it didn't work back then. It probably doesn't work on that VHS you own. No. It's just bad. It is just the worst effect.
It reminds me, or I kept thinking while I was watching it, you know what they could have done that would have been 100 times more effective? If they just took the Evil Dead route and just did a lot of camera work, POV, perhaps a sound effect. If you don't have the technical know-how or the money, because this seems like a time and money problem to me. If you don't have the time and money to do this, just use the subjective camera angles, put some sound effects over it, like maybe crawl up Isaac's body from when he's on the stalks and just like, and like keep the camera in his face and have him scream, and then you can do your exploding thing to interpret what this demon does or what it is. They kind of do a bit of an Evil Dead thing with the corn stalks themselves. It reminds me a lot of that tree scene, the famous tree scene in Evil Dead. So I was wondering why they didn't just, because they're like, well, we need the special effects because it's this grand finale and conclusion, but it looks like dog shit. So just leave it out and film it in a cheaper way.
Well, they don't skimp on the cheap. You know, when he returns, the effects applied to him at that point are fairly cheap as well. But yeah, I really think that it loses a lot, and it probably is across the board. People who have watched this will say that. I don't know that there would be someone in this planet that would say, oh my God, the scene where Isaac gets taken up by he who walks behind the rose is like chef's kiss perfection as far as the graphic representation of that and the technology at the time. No. It's garbage. It's a garbage effect. And yeah, they could have used some sort of artistic angle. They could have used some light effects, in-camera effects, physical effects. All sorts of stuff would have worked here. All sorts of stuff with a little creativity. But this movie is short on creativity. The height of creativity, aside from Stephen King's writing, is found in the drawings of the little girl that we see throughout the movie. And Corn Jesus.
When they have the idea to finish what the Blue Man started, to take this ethanol and to put it through the what is it, an irrigation system or a sprinkler system?
Yeah, irrigation system. It's a large scale irrigation system because it had been a farming community, so they have all of these rows in between the rows of piping for water to sprinkle. It's like a sprinkler system, but it's way bigger than that.
I live for the sass that Job gives Bert this entire fucking sequence, because Bert is like, I'm a man of action now. I have a fucking plan. I'm going to do this and do that, except he doesn't know how to do any of it. And he's got a lot of slippery hands. They can't find the right attachments for things. And he even tells Job, like, get out of here. I'm going to like handle this. And then 2 seconds later, Job is like telling him how you're supposed to not only operate this irrigation system and then have Job like open up the shit, but also like the line of, because Bert's gonna throw a Molotov cocktail while this big red cloud is coming towards them, which we assume is the demon itself, and he fucks up throwing the Molotov cocktail and it doesn't break, which is great because, you know, you throw a Molotov cocktail on soil, bottle's probably not going to break. And then he has the line, throw it right this time. I'm like, oh man, that's so good. It made me laugh out loud when that happened. And of course he does. And it seems that burning this shit is all you really need to do. Now, we don't ever see the fate of Isaac. We know that Isaac comes back possessed or empowered by he who walks.
Empowdered, you mean? Empowdered with baby powder. He's just covered. It's like they put Vaseline all over him and dumped him in baby powder, so he looks all possessed and stuff. But he basically looks like they greased him up and dipped him in baby powder. So he's empowdered, and he comes back to lay down the law.
Yeah, he essentially tells Malachai he wants you now, and breaks Malachai's neck. But we never see him again in this story, at least in this film. Does he come back for sequels? I can't even remember.
I don't really remember either. I believe he is.
Huh.
In the next one. I have to rewatch it, and I've wanted to have the set of the first 3 films for quite some time, and there is a set available in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I only wish that Malachai returned. You know, Courtney Gaines in this particular role. There's an interview which I want to listen to on the Geek House podcast or Page to Screen podcast, where they talk to him about what it was like filming, and they all do like a lot of appearances. So if you're interested in seeing John Franklin, Courtney Gaines, whoever else from this film, maybe not so much Linda Hamilton because she's so Linda Hamilton, but they have an appearance coming up in Pennsylvania in September, and they do like horror hound weekends and all sorts of appearances and stuff. I really ought to listen to them talk about this particular role, the role of Isaac as well. Like having an actor that had studied theater and had been in plays and was a university graduate, you can see why Isaac has such presence. Mm-hmm. And you know, his stature, his voice, his looks aside, which would have been an automatic yes in casting, I think, he also had the chops. Mm-hmm. So I hope he comes back. I just don't remember. I remember the darker kind of like 4th film in kind of stuff where, of course, it's totally different kids. But mm-hmm. in the book, it's very different. In the short story, it's a very, very different outcome. I highly recommend reading that if you're thirsty for a different outcome and different people surviving in different ways.
This is a film that was created in the early 80s, and as such, it adheres to the one last scare phenomena that many films were in this. I find this a completely goofy and ineffective scene. Because it's with a character who I don't care about, who they could have easily had Isaac back and like maybe resolve that a little bit or whatever. But you have like this Bert who's being all goofy, like, I guess they're going to adopt these kids, or at least, oh, you can stay with us for a month, oh, maybe a week, maybe this, maybe that. And then they get into the car, even though it's completely jammed with corn and obviously looks like it won't run. And then you have the young girl, one of the only girls that have, aside from Sarah, who have speaking lines that was going to sacrifice Amos, I suppose. She was also preaching a lot in their little church that they had. And so she's obviously another older kid, another pillar of this corn community. And even after the wind was taken out of all the kids' sails to the point in which they all sort of ran into the woods, she still has murder on her mind and then just gets instantaneously knocked out. And it's treated more like a sitcom beat. Like, she's knocked out cold. What are we gonna do? Like, nothing. She tried to kill you. Just leave.
We'll send her a get well card from Seattle. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, and it could have been so much better served by ending the movie with them approaching the car and being like, well, I guess we're walking, and that's the end of that. Mm-hmm. And it would have actually fit better with The Stand, mm-hmm. because if I want to take it to the Stephen King multiverse again, they all had to walk because there was no cars or gas or nothing, and they didn't want to draw attention to one another anyway. So it would have been like, not that it's the beginning of The Stand at all, but it would have been like, oh, a little bit of deja vu. But no, they have to ruin it with this weird ass ending.
Something to sit on. What do we got next for him?
Coming up next, we're going to be within the corn again as part of Stephen Kingapalooza, which we do almost every year here at deadairssplatterpictures.net. We're going to do 1922, which is a West pick, and Stephen King.
Stephen King and a West pick, 1922, 1 century later, in 2022. We'll be delivering that to you. It'll be really fun to revisit that film. I haven't gone back to it since it premiered on Netflix.
Me neither, and I'm looking forward to it because I did enjoy it quite a lot, and we were talking about it beforehand. We're trying to decide, like, does this fit in? Is it too sleepy? And it's so well acted and so picturesque and so very dark. I really like this film quite a lot, that I believe it fits. Much like Sling Blade. To explain the premise of Sling Blade and the story of Sling Blade is very sleepy, but it is riveting. And 1922 is riveting. It's one of the few Netflix originals that I really like. And I think that is, it should have gone wide in theaters if it didn't. I don't think it did. I think it was only a Stephen King and Netflix thing.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, it was.
It's fantastic. So we will be staying in Nebraska as well for this particular story. And this, oddly enough, quite a random pick on our part, takes place in Hemingford, where Bert was trying to get to instead of Gaitlin, where they were told to go to by the dead gas attendant in Children of the Corn. So it's the exact same area many, many years before. So in 1922, a farmer who lives in Hemingford, Nebraska, is not very happy about his wife's plans to sell the farm and move to Omaha with their son. So it takes place next door to Gaitlin. I really, really, this is delicious. And the corn look of the fields everywhere is something we'll spend a lot more time with in 1922.
I can tell you this much. I sure wish that Bert did make it to that particular town, because he could have possibly fallen into a well from whence there is no return.
This will be fantastic. I welcome the well. What is it about some of our favorite movies have to do with little girls in a well or women in a well.
I think that wells are just so creepy because it incorporates fear of heights, fear of water, fear of the dark, and fear of disease. It encapsulates all of these things.
And it is just a little bit closer to hell.
And on that note, I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air.